Well, it is a pleasure to be here. I was actually a resident of this town for 11 months back in 1973. So it's been a few years. And I actually did my master's degree on these trees here. If you remember back to 1974, 75, they did a construction project that put in a drainage system all alongside of these trees. And they actually came all the way from down near the tobacco fields up to here. They crossed the street here, but basically damaged all the trees that were down on that side. I'll tell you a little story. It's kind of interesting because at that time I was a graduate student. I looked like a graduate student, which means basically scruffy, especially back in 1975. And when you work in a neighborhood, you always have people, kind of peeking out of the blinds to see where you are. Who's that weirdo that's in front of my house? And I had this thing here, which was like a holster, so it kind of looked like it was walking around with a gun. And basically what I was trying to figure out is how many of these trees were going to die because of the root damage and what have you. And I wasn't as politically sensitive then as I am now. And this lady who'd been peeking out the window at me for several days while I've been measuring all the trees and shooting the heights of the trees, this is what we used to shoot the height of the trees, came out and she said to me, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm an urban forestry student over at UMass, and I'm trying to determine how long it's going to be before these trees die or fall over." Well, this tree that in front of her house was 56 inches in diameter. It had a lean on it like this right towards her house. And she looked at the tree and looked at the house and started crying. So I've kind of mellowed out how I explain things to people now. I was asked to explain to you all how to measure these trees. And as an amateur, you can go out and you can do the measurements yourself, but the official measurements have to be done by the DCR. A colleague of Alan's is Charles Burnham, whose phone number is in that pamphlet I just handed you all. And Charlie would send out an official person to do the official measurements. Now the information on this plaque here is absolutely incorrect. This tree is not the oldest or largest sycamore east of the Mississippi River. It's not even close. Okay, but it is the largest one in the state of Massachusetts. There is a larger one in Connecticut right now. But I did notice that the last time in the paperwork I have, the last time the tree was measured was 1999, and Alan thinks it may have been measured since then. And the one down in Connecticut may have been measured in 1998. So the question is, have both of these trees continued to grow, or has something maybe awful happened to the one down there where a branch broke off or the top broke out? Because if you lost, say, 6 feet off the top of the tree, or a lateral branch broke off and made it narrower, then the point system that you have in that pamphlet would change. Now we do have in Massachusetts a couple of other trees. And when I was in exile down in New York City, I was city forester in New York City, we had a competition to find the largest trees in New York City. And believe it or not, the largest tulip tree in the state of New York is actually in Manhattan, in the north end of Manhattan. And people think of New York City as being just high-rise apartments, and there's actually woodlands that are bigger than Mount Toby Forest inside of New York City. Van Cortlandt Park and several others. So we found some really, really big trees, which was kind of a challenge because we had kids and old folks and everybody else running around measuring the trees. You have some fantastic soil. We were just talking. You have some of the best soil on the East Coast, right here where we're standing right now. And it makes me go to tears every time I see a house going up on this agricultural land, because once they put the asphalt down, it's there forever and ever. But I remember as a forestry student going with Joe Mawson up the road here. And when the road divides, it swings around to the right there. There's a farm on the left-hand side. They used to have a big sugar maple in the front yard with a chain in it holding it together. I don't know if the chain's still there, but the sugar maple, I believe, is still there. And there's open fields there, and then there's a pine grove down on the back side there. We measured pine trees down there at that time that were like 110 foot tall. But you don't realize how tall they are because there's so many of them all together. So that's, for me, that would be one of the places I would go down and check and say, how tall are these trees actually? Because maybe you do have a champion tree right for New England. It's probably you wouldn't for the country, but you very well could for New England. A co-champion red oak is up in Buckland. And I don't know if it still holds the title, but that was measured a number of years ago too. So I think it'd be kind of fun, you know, to go out and see what's out there. It'd be the type of thing you could do with your kids, grandkids, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, what have you. It's not a difficult thing to do. If you look at that handout I gave you all, thanks. On the second page there, we start talking about to do the measurements. And the first thing we're going to do is you're going to measure the circumference of the tree. Now normally, when we do diameter, we use what's known as a diameter tape. And you'll notice that a diameter tape has inches on one side, but each inch on the other side is 3.14 inches long for circumference. So normally when we measure trees, we take the diameter in inches, not circumference. But for measuring these big trees, we measure inches. Okay, and this tape, which is fairly long tape, is not long enough to go around this one here. So I actually brought a 100-foot tape so that we can actually measure it. Now DBH stands for diameter at breast height. It is always, always measured at 4.5 feet off the ground. So if we took a tape, and I always had the kids do this with themselves, and this is, these are not inches, these are tenths of a foot. In this particular one here, so here we have 4 feet 5 inches. So right there on me, 4.5 feet DBH is right there at my pocket. Now if I asked Jennifer to come over here, it would probably be right about here on her forehead. And I always do pick on her because she's one of the best horticulturists at the University of She's probably the best horticulturist at the University of Massachusetts. She is the source of all knowledge and understanding there. So if you got a horticultural question, she's the one to talk to. So we always measure DBH at 4.5 feet off the ground. Okay? In this particular case here for the tree we're measuring today, we will be measuring it at 4.5 feet off the ground, but we won't be measuring the diameter, we'll be measuring the circumference. Okay? So that's the easy measurement, and that's the one we're going to be able to get tonight without any problem. The second one, and that's one you could do with any tape. Okay? And if you don't have a tape long enough, you could use a piece of a rope, go all the way around the tree, and then just measure it on a yardstick and get a rough estimate of what that actually is. The next one is the height. And there's all different types of tools. You can use simple triangulation, okay, where you can take a stick as long as you're round, hold it, and then you just back off until you see it, the little diagram there showing you how to do that. Every Boy Scout, Girl Scout book has a little triangulation thing showing you how to get the height of the tree. We have different types of height, ways of shooting height. This one happens to be in percentage. And all we do here is we release the pin here. I look through this. I scout at the top of the tree, the highest point, and I pull the trigger, and I can get a reading off of this here. When Charlie Burnham comes out, he uses laser which is pinpoint accurate. But you can, again, if you go online and get the list of trees, you can see that, hey, the champion tree is 103 feet tall. It looks like this tree is 107 feet tall. So you know you're in the ballpark of maybe having a champion tree. So, 2 measurements so far. Circumference at DBH, height of the tree. The height of the tree is probably going to be the most difficult one for you to find. The last measurement is actually 2 measurements. And what you do there is you look at the widest point of spread of the tree. Okay, so you find the widest spread of the tree, and probably here on this tree here, it probably goes along the length of the sidewalk. I'm not sure. All right, and then you find the shortest width of the tree. And you add those 2 together and divide. So that gives you your point system. So you add up the height of the tree in feet, the circumference in inches, and the spread. And that gives you your point total for any tree that you're trying to do. And you can compare that against the lists for Massachusetts or the national list. Any questions on that? Okay, so I guess the plan now is that we take a walk outside with a flashlight, and we'll do the circumference of the tree, okay? We're not going anywhere yet. This seems low. Okay. Right about here. Okay. You get that, Jeff? Well, let's. Okay. Go ahead, Al.
And the number is
25 feet even. 25 feet.
Wow.
24, 25 feet. So whatever that is times 12. Jennifer, 25 times 12. Any questions on what we're doing with the measurements? Okay. So basically 4.5 feet off the ground, all the way around. The key is when you're using your tape on a tree this big is make sure the tape stays even all the way around. Okay? Now remember the second reading, the second reading was the height of the tree. There's no way we're going to see that even with these lights.
Yeah.
And the third reading is you have to go all the way out to the furthest branch. The longest distance, it has to be square, and the shortest distance. And those, you take those and follow the formula that's on that sheet. Any questions?
how old do you estimate the tree to be?
Have no idea.
Okay, that's a good
Okay? And all kinds of people come up when they say there's ways of figuring it out. There is no way of figuring it out. You get a drought year, you may get a growth of 1/16 of an inch of growth. You get 2 or 3 wet years, you may be getting a ½ inch of growth a year, maybe more. The age of the tree makes a big difference too. It doesn't grow fast at first. In the teenage years, it grows very rapidly. When it gets older, it just slows down in its growth habitat. You put a road in, it slows it down. Put a sidewalk in, slows it down.
Don't these trees eventually go hollow though? So,
Well, any tree can go hollow, but to go hollow is a result of some type of an injury to the tree.
yeah. No, I thought sycamores went hollow in the normal course of growth. No? Oh, okay.
No.
Myth.
No.
Okay, that's another myth.
No,
to correct.
no, I wouldn't think no more than anything else.
Okay.
You know,
Could you compare this tree to the one in Hatfield that they chopped down?
well, the one that's in Hatfield's on the ground.
Yeah.
This one's still standing. The one in Hatfield had to come down because it was completely hollow. There was about 2 inches of Holden wood, 4 inches of Holden wood, all the way around on that tree.
How did they figure that out?
They used a machine called a resistograph. And what had happened was a major leader had broken off, and you could see that the tree was totally hollow. And then they went in with a resistograph, which is a machine that measures resistance. So if we were resistographing this tree and it was solid, the chart, it looks like an EKG, wouldn't change. Okay? But if it went in and it had punky wood, it would drop, and if it had hollow wood, it would flatline. That tree went in about 2-3 inches, depending where they were on the tree, and it flatlined. So you had a tree almost as big around as this. It was completely hollow. I actually got a photograph of a guy standing inside of it. Well, actually right in front of it, but he could have stood in front of it. So, yes, sir.
Did you check with the National Archives?
In reference to,
This tree?
what about it?
Well, it's in the National Records of Washington, D.C. I sent them in 1970 something.
The American Forest Association.
Pardon?
The American Forest Association?
Yes.
Yes.
Through somebody at the university.
Probably through Francis Holmes.
Yes.
Francis Holmes was the pathologist at the Shade Tree Lab for years, and he kept the New England Register for probably 20 years. The register, the one I have in the room in there now, was the last edition that Francis did.
It's in the National Archives.
Yes, but this is not the largest tree east of the Mississippi River. Okay.
Last I knew, there was one in the swamps of North Carolina.
Well, there's actually quite a number. This is the largest one. It's the largest one in Massachusetts. Okay. It's not the largest one in New England. And generally speaking, when you're looking for your big trees, the further south you go, generally they have a better chance of getting the big trees because you've got a longer growing season, is what it comes down to. But we have some champion trees here in New England, so, on the National Register. Any questions? Why don't we go back in where we can see each other?
I am with it, probably more. Since I've been here, we've replaced the cables a couple of times, either through growth or wind stress, but it's snapped its cables a few times. There are 3 sets of cables up there. As of now, one of the cables is snapped, so that's on the list to probably within the next month. They're going to do one here and a couple on South Main Street. Probably 5 years ago, we treated it for anthracnose, which is it's not a blight. On a really wet year, you'll get a wilting in the leaves. And the university had a program where they were doing a treatment of chemical application for anthracnose. So we treated the sycamore here, and we treated the ones actually into buttonball. They gave us a thing free of charge. And you'll see sometimes really when it's a really, really wet year, you'll see the leaves will tend to shrivel a little bit, and they'll dry. There's some on South Mill Village Road, actually, in South Deerfield had it the same year ours did. And that's probably had it who knows how many times over the last 300 odd years, and no one's done anything, I mean, to treat it, and it's come through. So there's the cabling in the trees, the amount of weight up there, the mass, you probably got each leader could probably go 10 or 12 tons. So the cabling helps it, but I don't know in a hurricane if it would actually, the cables would actually support the weight of the leaders because there's so much weight up there. It kind of gives you an indication of the growth also, because as it does spread and grow, and it'll break its own cables. A couple other trees, there's one we did on near the boat ramp. There's another sycamore that's around 4.5 or 5 foot in diameter, and we cabled that about 3 years ago, actually. But Charlie can give you maybe a little history on he put the stone out in front with a plaque on it. The other half of the stone actually is the half at the highway garage. So we had a mason split it, and then he had the plaque made. So maybe, Charlie, if you want to give him a little history on the plaque, that was before my time.
There's 3 pieces to that.
3 pieces, okay.
Arborist Association, and that's now changed its name to Tree Care Industry Association. And what we tried to do in each state was recognize a significant tree. So the tree that was recognized in the state of Massachusetts was the buttonball tree.
Well, if there's anything else actually on the sycamore, there are a few others in town. When they built the buttonball condominium complex, there's sycamore there. There's another sycamore in front of the elementary school, actually, on the center island. And there's another large one, not nearly near as large, but it's near the boat ramp going down to the river. There's a large sycamore there that we cabled because it was getting a little heavy, and the resident wanted the tree taken down, and we cabled it just to secure it a little bit more. I didn't want to lose it. I don't know if I can answer any other questions on the sycamore for you. Dennis, what is the height? What was it determined at last time?
I'd have to look at the piece of paper. It was right side here. The height was 141 feet.
141.
No, 129.
129.
129.
Yeah, we lost a leader on it. It was last summer or the summer before we had a bad storm come through. And we lost one leader right across Route 47, actually, and took all the wires out. But then they went up there and they did some of the, I think northern I had in here, and they cleaned up some of the dead wood in it and lightened up a little bit over the road there. There were a few fractured ones that were taken off. But pretty much beyond that, it's been on its own, I guess.
Does any of the butt go, does the town line go through any of the butt?
Well, it would be probably about a foot behind the back of the sidewalk is about the property line there.
Because if it goes through any of the butt, correct, I mean, wrong, then it's automatically a town tree.
Okay.
If any part of that butt
Okay.
spread touches the town line, it's a town tree.
Okay.
That's
That's
chapter
gonna be,
87.
Well, that's what Francis Holmes told me from the university years ago. And he says, don't you worry about it, you just go in and take care of it. And he would back me 100%. And we had another outfit that came in, wanted to drill a hole right through the center of the tree. And that was an absolute no-no, because you just, that's not done. And nobody climbs that tree with spurs on.
no, that's all bucket and ropes.
You can't trim that tree with ropes and, the booms that they have on these trucks today, well, I wouldn't even hire the man.
Yeah, that's, all the trees in town, there isn't a spur put in any of the trees. None of them. They're all roped and they're all
And
bucket.
some of the
That's it.
cables in this town, we put in years ago, and it was done through Mr. Holmes and Milt Williams, because he had a good tree man. He used to climb them trees and put the cables in. And let me tell you, them cables saved a lot of trees
Yeah.
in this town.
Yeah,
And
there's
they still do.
Yep, the one at Clarence Clark's house, Charlie knows that one well with a cavity in it. And it's got a large cavity, but both sides of the tree are healthy. It's one of the first ones in the spring to green up, and it's one of the last in the fall to lose its leaves. And it's a balanced tree with a heavy cable in it, and it's withstood all the storms that we had this summer, which were pretty severe on South Main Street. So we did lose a lot of leaders on some of the older maples, and some of them were cabled, and the leaders that were cabled together, we lost one side, so now we've got some precarious trees hanging over houses without any cables on anymore. So there's around 20 trees that gotta come down around town, now down on Main Street, but there's a lot of them that we had from the storm damage back in July. It took some of the trees and it twisted them like a barber pole, and then they actually came back and it split them up 30 feet vertically, like a twister would have, but just like you were wringing a towel. So it did a lot of damage actually to a lot of the old historic trees in town.
Lake Hitchcock come in here and flood the whole area. I believe Lake Sunderland was part of that. And then that finally drained off, and somewhere along the lines, people came across the land bridge into North America and started wandering around, and Native Americans ended up settling in the area at some point. I'm not sure when that was. And they managed the forest intensely. They didn't just sit back and, look at things and say, what a nice tree. I mean, they harvested timber, they harvested firewood, they used fire on a massive scale to create pathways for them to travel through the woods, to get to different hunting areas, or get to different areas where they'd spend the winter or the summer. And they also cleared area for livestock, for deer, and things that could graze. There'd be good hunting grounds. And trappers essentially came in at some point and brought some disease with them. And about the time the settlers began moving into the New England, about 50% of the Native American population was gone. So they had all these cleared roads, essentially is what they were. They were cleared ways through the forests, plus the rivers, that Europeans found very easy to traverse. They were just opened areas, and they were like, hey, this looks like a good way, we'll just go in here. And by the way, here's this big opening where there was once a settlement, or where there was maybe an agricultural field or something that they maintained. And they found those to be really nice places to set up and make their settlements. So when you have things like Westfield and Springfield, many of those cities were developed in areas that were fields that were cleared by Native Americans. And when the Europeans came in, they set up camp. So that goes up to the first settlers. And then, Sunderland, I guess, was incorporated in 1718, from what I heard. And from there, we'll begin our story about, what this community has been doing and how they've been caring for their forest, their urban forest. So I'm not quite sure if this meant that there were 7 bridges all at once in Sunderland, or there were 7 separate bridges sequentially in the same place. That lumber came from Mount Toby, came from the surrounding area. So if you want to talk about your buy local, support your local farmer, well, it's the real meaning of it, I believe. And there were several sawmills in town, off of School Street and one off of Old Amherst Road. So they were harvesting it here, milling it here, using it here, which some may think that would be a good idea if we get back to doing that. In 1842, Irish immigrants came into town to work for Henry Shepherd on his tract of land, and my guess is many of them stayed around. So the first tree inventory, which is kind of ironically that in my program, what we're really pushing communities to do now is do tree inventories. And back in 1830, essentially, there was one done in Sunderland to lay out where the trees were going to be planted and to catalog where trees were already planted.
Just to help explain the map, because I gave this to Alan, in the middle of the street, you'll see there's little asterisks. And in our volume 1 history, it goes through Henry Taft to the very end, and there's an appendix. He goes through and he actually itemizes. He tells you who lives in what houses and kind of when they were built. But he also goes through and tells you where all the shade trees were in town. So those little asterisks represent where those trees were. He said they were in the front of so-and-so's house in the street. So the streets obviously weren't like we have them now. They were, just dirt roads. But there was quite a number of trees, and one of those, of course, is the sycamore, the buttonball tree. So anyway.
Yeah, so, no, thank you for clarifying that.
Seen the map, but they weren't probably looking at the asterisks.
And I have a copy of the literature you sent me with some of the trees and the homes and the occupants, if anybody wants to look at that afterwards. And then 1830, Dr. Gardner began a movement to actually give the town streets some uniformity and straightness, and worked with the community to essentially realign the street a little bit and straighten out fences and create a tree line in the community. And from what I understand in the literature, he was pretty successful in doing that. And essentially that's what you have now on your streets, the trees that were planted are lining your streets today. And then in 1838, the elm trees, planting of elm trees really began in earnest in town. So some of those remaining elm trees that you're talking about possibly go back to 1838. So you probably recognize this area. Sunderland Center looking southwards. Actually, it doesn't really look all that different. I mean, if you look in a leaf-off view today, it is different, but you still have a lot of agricultural field. You still have the river running through it, and you have homes and trees. This is your community forest. In 1877, efforts began to beautify the cemetery and plant trees. And from what I hear, there's also a very nice selection of native New England trees planted in the cemetery. And in 1934, the Sunderland Women's Club sponsored an inventory to have all the trees identified and tagged with metal tags to see what species they were. And Professor Waugh from UMass ID'd each tree. And UMass has an arboretum on campus named after Waugh, the Waugh Arboretum. So there's a lot of town and gown relations going on back then. Again, Sunderland Center. So is that the library right up here? No. Yes. Yep. There we go. Looks like a spruce of some kind. Looking east. That is looking east.
Main Street runs north
And this elm tree over here, up in this side over here, I can't really see, right about here, this is the one that came down a couple of years ago, maybe more. It was kind of out in the asphalt driveway for a
Right in
minute.
front of the old town office.
Let's see.
There's a school. Town office is right in here. This is Morris Drive. That's an old photo, actually.
It's probably 1920, 50s?
That might be 1950.
So it's that late.
That tree was planted, Bill Hubbard, he was in elementary school when he planted, that was his class project. And Bill is how old now? 90, almost 88. And I think he said he was 8 years old when he planted that tree, so that'll give you an indication of what the age of the elm is.
Why were the elm trees planted anyways? Just for getting shade or?
They provide a very nice, quick canopy for the roads and the public ways. And they tend to branch upright in like a vase shape. So they provide a very unique characteristic to the community and to the landscape. Very graceful. And they're very hardy. Like a sycamore, elm trees are a floodplain tree. They're found naturally growing along floodplains, which are areas that get flooded regularly. So they can really tolerate the low oxygen environment in the soils, like you would have in an urban environment. So when you plant them on the street, they have a much better chance of surviving with a lot of asphalt and compaction around them.
No, the varieties of the elm now that are disease resistant, they're taking the liberty now, are they time proven or is it just?
Yep. That's, Chip was asking if there are any elm trees that are disease resistant these days. And there are. There's, I think there's about a half dozen varieties now that are disease resistant. So they're not immune to Dutch elm disease. And we're recommending that when you plant them very sparsely and you plant them not in groupings because we don't want it to spread through root graft. And there's a Liberty elm is one variety. There's a Princeton elm.
Princeton's getting good reviews.
Princeton's getting very good reviews.
Princeton.
And there are other elms that are resistant, but they're not American elm hybrids. But there are resistant elm trees, and hopefully we'll keep getting better at developing better resistance. So today, it's Chip, not Chuck.
Chip.
Sorry about that. So essentially, you have the town has roughly a $9,000 budget to do all the tree work, and the sycamore could eat up all that $9,000 probably if something happened to it. And you have many mature trees in town for $9,000 to be stretched a long way, and you're doing a great job with that money.
We're always looking for something for nothing. So we had, the school came down, there was a planning plan, and there wasn't any money left for the planning, so the town of Hadley put in a large nursery 10 years ago, 12 years ago. So I talked to the Shade Tree Committee in Hadley, and they donated about 25 trees that year for us. I had Sandy Williams in South Deerfield. He came in with his crew, and they dug them and balled and burlapped and brought them to Sunderland for $35 a tree. So that's a bargain for a 2 to 3 inch diameter tree, and then they helped us plant them. So we got quite a few. We did a lot at the school that year. We put a lot of trees in. So it's any time you can squeeze something, you know.
That's the part of the community. When you get to, you're talking about community forestry, you're talking about involving other people, other groups, the schools. Few things build community as much as a tree planting, and people seem to become very passionate around their trees.
You got to look at the big picture. We're all going to be gone one of these days, you know. And so you can spend money on trucks and equipment, but you know, Sunderland Main Street is Sunderland Main Street. So 100 years from now, what we're doing for those trees is still going to be here. You know? So if you don't take care of them now, budget years are bad. And I think we got a budget person in the room. Budget years are bad, but you know, you got to look at the future. You got to look at what this town's going to look like in 100 years from now. You still, if you want to see a classic example of no tree work, go to Main Street in Northfield. They cut trees 20 years ago. The stumps are still there. There's nothing replacing them. It's hack and whack. That's not what you want to do. You want to have this town Main Street look the same 50 or 75 years from now as it looks right now. You know, it's your legacy, you know. So, with that said.
Perfectly said. Then in 1998, William and Eleanor Hubbard created the Main Street Tree Fund with a $10,000 donation, which you've already heard about tonight. That's quite a gift, and that's a gift that keeps on giving. I mean, those trees that are going to keep getting planted will be here for generations to see. So somebody had the foresight to plant the trees that are here now. And we can't forget that we have to do the same thing for the future generations. And there is, Sunderland does have sort of a unofficial tree committee, from what I understand, that helps with selection of the species and trees in town along Main Street. Sounds like this town should apply for a Tree City USA application. We should do that.
We did heritage trees a few years ago. But, and I think we did the Tree USA. We got a grant for quite a few trees. That was 8, 9 years ago.
Thank you.
What exactly is a Tree City USA? What is that? Is that a grant?
Well, Tree City USA actually is a program sponsored by the National Arbor Day Foundation, and our program oversees it for Massachusetts. And it requires that the community that applies to meet certain standards of tree care, community outreach, education, and funding for their trees. It's $2 per capita, which sounds like you meet pretty easily. It's a recognition for your efforts. And right now, Massachusetts has 100 Tree City USAs. Hadley just became one. Amherst has been one for 21 years. Greenfield's Tree City USA. So I'd be more than happy to work with the town to help them reach that goal. So I've been talking about the urban and community forestry and what it is. Anybody here want to just give me some thoughts on, off the top of your head, what you think urban or community forestry means to you?
Care of the street trees?
Care of street trees. Anybody else? What does it mean when you say community forest, urban forest? Do you think of Sunderland as urban? No. Central Park is urban, right. And that's a great point, that Central Park has more trees probably than Sunderland does. I'm guessing, maybe except for Mount Tilly. Yeah. So that's pretty forested, if you ask me. But yet that's really, we think of that as an urban forest. It's surrounded by the built environment. So when I'm talking about community forestry and urban forestry, I'm talking about the built environment in which we live and where we want to create a good tree canopy. This tree canopy has been proven pretty clearly to have a lot of positive effects to humans, both physically and mentally. They clean our air. They remove pollution in the urban environment, essentially at the source, so from our tailpipes and from our heating plants in our homes. Trees are there sucking the pollution out of the air, absorbing carbon, reducing stormwater runoff. So when we have these big heavy rains, if we didn't have trees and we had all asphalt and compacted turf, we'd have a lot more water that we'd have to manage in our storm drains, which means we have to build bigger pipes and things like that to manage that stormwater. And trees have a big effect on our psyche. You know, hospitals that have trees, windows with looking over on trees, the patients tend to recover faster in studies. Densely populated housing areas that are well treed have lower crime rates than similar housing areas with fewer trees. Students who have attention deficit disorder find that a simple walk in the woods or walk in a tree, treed landscape reduces the effect of attention deficit disorder. So being in nature, being surrounded by trees has a very positive effect to us that we take for granted every day. We just love it. You know, we're here. Maybe they're the reason we're here. We came to this community. It was well treed. There's that rural pastoral views. And that's the quality of life that we've chosen to take, living in our communities. So, to me, that's what community urban forestry is. It's not just a tree, it's the whole environment. So again, it's the built environment created in or out of forested areas. So going back to that glacier, which was then the lake, then came all forest, which was managed by Native Americans. Everything here essentially was trees at one time. And humans have interacted with those trees in different ways over the eons here. And we're still in the forest. We never left the forest, we've just changed it, is my view. So it's the continuum, it's the forest that's in Main Street, through our yards, across the river, into the woods, Mount Toby. So the forest doesn't just end abruptly, this is forest and this isn't forest. It's the continuum across everything. And the urban forest and the community forest has the same biological processes that take place in the forest, take place in your backyard and on our main street. You still have water cycle, nutrient cycle, the carbon cycle, all those things are trying to happen. We've interrupted it. And so as you can probably guess, I've moved out of the history of Sunderland. I'm moving into why urban community forestry is important, why caring for your trees in your community is important. And it's not just your street trees, but it's your own yard trees, trees on your own property. So the UN had a goal to plant 1 billion trees. They reached that goal way ahead of schedule because they've realized that planting trees around the world in communities is a great way to improve people's quality of life and to restore the environment which has been severely damaged. New York City has a 1 million tree goal. They're buying up nursery stock all over East Coast to reach that goal. Boston has a 100,000 tree goal to plant in the next 20 years. Amherst just said has a goal to plant 250 trees for its 250th anniversary coming up. And all of these goals are to increase the tree canopy. Now when I'm talking about tree canopy, or use the word canopy cover, it's sort of what you see if you had a bird's eye view looking down in your community. Like those, if you've ever looked at those Google Maps with the aerial view, what you see as a tree canopy, that's the canopy cover. It covers the ground. It covers our rooftops, it covers our roads, shades our roofs and roads. And this canopy cover has a pretty significant impact on reducing climate change effects. So by cooling the urban areas, we burn less fossil fuels to run air conditioners, and then the health and all the other good things that I just talked about. And your tree warden over here has quite a job at hand. It's not just a matter of knowing trees. You're fortunate to have a tree warden who actually did go to school for trees in arboriculture. Most communities don't have a tree warden that is actually necessarily qualified. They're generally given to the DPW director and said, here, you're a tree warden. So to be a tree warden or to care for your community urban forestry, you need the forestry arboriculture experience. You've got to understand what you're dealing with. What is this resource? How do you manage it? What's best for the resource? The natural resource, too, you have to understand how the trees interact with the environment, and then how we interact with the environment and how that affects the trees. So you also have to understand engineering. You've got to be able to speak engineers' language. You have to understand how to talk to them so they understand that you understand what they're talking about. So that tell them if they're going to do a trench or conduit, that there are other ways to go about doing it so you won't cut the roots of the sycamore tree. You also have social skills. The meaning, the benefits of the trees to the community. Economics, the benefits of trees, the dollar value they provide to the community, and adding extra value to your homes A well-treed landscape in front of the home increases the house value. Same with the commercial districts. A well-treed commercial district increases the times people are willing to spend in those business districts. They like being in well-treated landscape areas. So if you want to fight with the malls and draw business back away from all these strip malls, you want to have a well-treated landscape that is inviting for people to come. It's different, it's unique. It's not the same thing as the mall, the strip mall. And you have to be a politician. You got to be political. You got to work with local governments, local administrations to get the funds to run your program and to grow your program. That's a tough job. So there's a whole sea change happening now in the role that urban forestry plays, that community forestry plays. We're realizing that just having trees in our yard, there's more to it than just having aesthetics. The Forest Service has come up with a guide, cost benefits and strategic planning for trees in the Northeast. They've actually found ways to assign dollar values to trees, individual species, and with their size, and how much dollar value that particular tree can provide to your yard or your community. And they're calling those ecosystem services. So how much dollar value do these services the tree provide? The cooling, the cleaning of the air, sequestering of CO2, the stormwater runoff. If we assign values to those, and you can talk to your politicians, you can talk to your engineers, and all of a sudden they're saying, wow, this is a really expensive piece of infrastructure we're actually dealing with here. It's not just a tree, it's actually infrastructure. And we need to learn how to treat it better because it's a better resource and we have to take care of it. So, does Sunderland value its community forest, its urban forest? Looks like it. I think so. Doing a good job. You know, the people that planted the sycamore tree or the elm trees in town, they were actually making investments in capital to their community. They wanted to straighten out the street and they wanted to plant trees because they knew that it was hot in the summertime and it was dry in the summertime and there was dust, and we wanted to shade our streets and create a nice living environment. So they're actually investing in capital for the community. Many communities in Massachusetts began doing this with village improvement associations in the early 1800s. With the purpose of ornamenting and beautifying the public grounds of the town. Many of these you actually had to pay to be a member of, and that money was used to help purchase trees and plant trees. We all know, anybody know where this elm tree is? Anybody see the construction going on around that elm tree? I didn't see a lot of really effective root zone protection taking place on this elm tree. So by the numbers, trees do add up. Cost-benefit ratio of 3 to 1. Now we're talking the language of the politicians, we're talking the language of the accountants, that we can assign a value to a tree. For every dollar your tree warden spends on a tree, that tree is giving back $3 worth of these ecosystem services to the community. You can work with your tree warden to promote Arbor Day planting events. Schools are a perfect situation for an Arbor Day tree planting event. There's also an Arbor Day poster contest with 6th graders. It's a national competition. It's a state level competition, and then the winners from the state competition get sent up to the national competition. And each year there's a different theme for the 6th graders to work with. And that's a program that's sponsored by the National Arbor Day Foundation. You can do anniversary tree planting events, town anniversaries. And so whenever your next anniversary is, you could do a big tree planting or fundraising campaign for your trees. You can do memorial or honor retiring community leaders or benefactors in town with special tree plantings. You want to keep it up. You want to keep trees in the news. And never miss an opportunity to educate the public at large on the important role they play. Obviously, you want to work with your tree warden and DPW. These are the two people that will be doing most of your public tree work, tree care. If you have a tree committee, you could think about joining it, or you could think about forming one to help educate the public, to be a sounding board for the public. Work with your conservation department. You want to kind of work with your engineers. You know, hey, stop by with your town engineer and let them know that you care about trees. They're not just a nuisance. That just because there's a straight line on a drawing doesn't mean the straight line has to continue. It can curve and go around a tree. If you have a chamber of commerce, get them involved with your community trees. Neighborhood groups, church groups, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, excellent.
Historical, Women's Club.
Historical club, yep. I got historical commission down there. Get involved. I just want to say thank you and tell you about a runner-up in the Blackstone Valley. Excuse me, Blackstone Valley. There's a large sycamore tree. This is probably the third or fourth largest sycamore in Massachusetts, in the Blackstone Valley. And there's an interesting story behind this, and hopefully it's still true, is that I was called by the tree warden of Blackstone to come take a look at this tree because it sits at the entrance of a flag lot where they wanted to build a very large development in Blackstone. And the development potentially could change the town's character quite a bit because it would flood the community with students, essentially. And they were not capable of dealing with that many people, students coming in all at once. So if you know what a flag lot is? Yeah, so it's a planning term, I think, that essentially where you have a piece of land that is landlocked, property locked. They have no access to this property except for through one area. So unless you go through unless you buy someone's house up and take over that piece of property, this particular property owner could not gain access to that property. It was an old farm field. And all they needed was a little cut through to get through the farm field, and they did. But it was abandoned. All the brush you see behind it grew up. But here's this big public shade tree standing in the way of progress. And it did stand in the way of progress. And from what I understood, it stopped the particular development from happening. That could be a bad thing. You know, progress isn't always bad. Maybe it was a good thing on this end, though. From my standpoint, it was a good thing. You know? So trees mean a lot to people if they can actually stop development from happening. And here's a little contact information for myself. And if you have any questions about the program in DCR, the Urban Community Forestry Program, you can talk to me. I have some handouts up here, some fact sheets. And I also have pest alert for folks on the Asian longhorn beetle. Has anybody here heard of the Asian longhorn beetle? Okay, if you haven't, you will. You definitely will tonight. It's a non-native insect that likes to bore into maples, all maples, elm, willow, horse chestnut, birch. There's currently no natural defenses that we know of against this insect, so that it's dangerous because once it gets into the environment, there's nothing there to stop it. And it likes to reproduce very quickly. And there's an infestation in Worcester. Just about the whole city of Worcester has been quarantined, so no wood of these host trees can leave Worcester. It's all going to be ground up essentially into a 1-inch dimensional wood chip, which the larvae which is in the tree can't survive. You know? And it's going to cost millions and millions of dollars to eradicate this pest. It may have been there for 9 years or more.
Any treatment for it? I don't want to know.
Well, there is some. Question was, is there any treatment for it? And we can treat trees that aren't infested. We can inject them with an insecticide so that when the adult beetle, feed on the leaves of the tree, they die from ingesting the insecticide. But the only really real way to control it is to cut down all the infested trees and then inject all the trees around it that are potential host trees, so that if one is still in the environment, when it feeds on one of these trees, it will die. But if you take one of these. If you see one of these critters crawling around, come next summer, because after the first hard frost, all the adults die. So it's just the larvae that are in the trees. And there is a native beetle very similar to this. It's called the white pine sawyer, but it doesn't have striped antennae. The antennae here have white banding along them. So that's an easy way to see the difference of the adult beetle. Please take one of these, and if you have any questions after the presentations, give me a call.